The silence in Havenwood was a living thing. It was woven from the rustle of leaves in the ancient oaks that lined the town's single paved road, the distant hum of a tractor in a far-off field, and the gentle creak of the porch swing, where Eleanor Reyes sat a soft blanket over her knees. It was a silence Anna Reyes had cultivated for 3 years, a fortress built of tranquility to keep the ghosts of her past at bay. Anna moved through her garden, her hands deft and sure, tending to the tomato vines. Here in the rich, dark soil she found a rhythm that soothed the frantic, calculating part of her mind she worked so hard to suppress. The world here was simple, governed by sun and rain, cause and effect. You plant a seed, you nurture it, it grows. There were no hidden variables, no corporate espionage, no betrayals that left you with nothing but a new name and the constant gnawing fear of being found. "You'll wear yourself out before lunch," Eleanor called, her voice thin but warm, carrying easily in the still morning air. Anna looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and offered her grandmother a genuine smile. It was a smile that reached her eyes, a rare thing these days. "These tomatoes won't pick themselves, Nana, and you know how you love them." "I love my granddaughter more." Eleanor said, her gaze sharp despite her age. "You're thinking again. I can see it in your shoulders." Anna's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Her grandmother saw too much. She forced her shoulders to relax, turning back to the vibrant red fruit. Just thinking about what to make for dinner. A lie. She was thinking about the encrypted security reports she'd read on a burner tablet last night. A habit she couldn't break. A weakness. A way of keeping a finger on the pulse of the world she had fled. It was a world of steel and glass towers, of data streams and algorithm-driven warfare. A world where she had once been a rising star, a strategist so brilliant they called her the architect. A world that had tried to swallow her whole. Here she was, just Anna, the quiet girl who ran the local farmer's market stand and took care of her ailing grandmother. And that was all she ever wanted to be again. The peace was shattered by a sound so alien to Havenwood it felt like a violation. It was the low guttural growl of a high-performance engine, a sound that spoke of money and power. It grew louder, closer, until a car long and black and gleaming like polished obsidian turned onto their dusty gravel driveway. It looked like a panther stalking into a sheep pasture. Anna froze, her hand hovering over a tomato. Her heart, a long dormant drum, began a frantic heavy beat against her ribs. They had found her. The thought was cold, sharp, and immediate. She straightened up slowly, her body tamping down the panic, her mind already shifting gears, cataloging escape routes, potential weapons. The gardening trowel in her hand had a decent weight and a sharp edge. The driver's side door opened, but the person who emerged was not who she expected. No grim-faced men in dark suits. This was a young man barely out of his teens with artfully messy dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that were a startling shade of intelligent, restless blue. He wore a simple black t-shirt that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, designer jeans, and sneakers that looked like they'd never touched a speck of dirt. He was lean, radiating a coiled energy, a boredom so profound it had become a kind of intensity. He surveyed the rustic scene, the peeling paint of the farmhouse, the overgrown honeysuckle on the porch trellis, Anna standing defensively in the garden with an expression that was a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "Annabelle Reyes?" he asked. His voice was smooth, confident, used to getting answers. Anna's mind raced. This wasn't them. Not her old employers, not her old enemies. This was something else. Something new and unpredictable. She maintained her composure, her face a carefully blank mask. "Can I help you?" The young man walked towards her, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, his blue eyes scanning her from head to toe, taking in her faded overalls, the dirt under her fingernails, the wary tension in her stance. "I'm looking for someone," he said, pulling a sleek, impossibly thin phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen and held it out. On it was a wall of text and complex diagrams, a strategic analysis of a recent, highly complex corporate merger. The person who wrote this. They go by the alias Cassandra. Anna's blood ran cold. It was her work. A late-night exercise she'd posted on a secure anonymous forum, a way to keep her strategic muscles from atrophying. She'd dissected the recent Logicor acquisition, pointing out the fatal flaws in the company's integration strategy, flaws no one else in the financial world seemed to see. It was a piece of intellectual vanity, a foolish risk, and now it had brought this stranger to her door, Never seen it before, she said, her voice even. I think you have the wrong place. We don't get much internet out here. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Don't insult my intelligence. Or your own. I backtraced the IP through 6 proxies in 2 continents. It was clever, I'll give you that. Military-grade obfuscation. But everything leaves a trail, and this one led right here. To this garden. He gestured dismissively at her surroundings. My name is Leo Vance, he announced, as if the name itself should mean something. And perhaps it did in a world she no longer belonged to. You're trespassing, Mr. Vance, Anna said, taking a deliberate step back towards the house. You should leave. Not without you, he stated, not as a request, but as a fact. I need a tutor. My father is under the impression that I'm failing my university business courses, which I am, deliberately. But he's decided to cut off my access to everything until my grades improve. Anna stared at him, bewildered. A tutor. This absurdly wealthy boy had hunted her down across the internet to this forgotten corner of the world because he needed help with his homework. The situation was so surreal, it was almost laughable. You're mistaken, she insisted, her voice firm. I'm not a teacher. I grow vegetables. Now please leave before I call the sheriff. Leo's eyes narrowed. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. She could smell the faint, expensive scent of his cologne, a clean, citrusy smell that was as out of place here as his car. You see, that's where you're wrong, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. You're not just a teacher. You're a brilliant one. The way you broke down Logicor's supply chain vulnerabilities, it was like watching a grandmaster play chess. You didn't just state the problem. You explained the why. You made it simple. That's what I need. Someone who can make the boring garbage they teach me actually make sense. Her mind, the analytical engine she fought to keep dormant, stirred against its will. He'd understood the nuance of her analysis. He wasn't just a rich, spoiled kid. He was sharp. Dangerously so. I'm not interested, she said, turning her back on him and walking towards the porch. Her grandmother was watching them, her old eyes filled with concern. My father is Alistair Vance, Leo said to her back. The name stopped her cold. Vance. As in Vance Industries, the tech behemoth, the global giant that had its hands in everything from private security to advanced AI. A company she had followed, studied, and deliberately avoided for years. Alistair Vance was a legend, a ruthless titan of industry. And this was his son. Anna slowly turned around, her expression unreadable. That doesn't change my answer. Doesn't it? Leo's lips curved into a wry, knowing smile. I'm authorized to offer you a salary. Let's say $200,000 for 3 months of your time. All you have to do is get me to pass my exams. The number hung in the air, obscene and unbelievable. It was more money than Havenwood's entire town budget for a year. It was enough to pay for her grandmother's experimental treatments in the city, the ones the local doctor had said were her only real hope. It was enough to secure their lives for years. It was a golden key to a cage she had just escaped. Anna's resolve, which she had thought was iron, began to waver. She glanced at Eleanor, who was now clutching the blanket tighter, a flicker of hope and fear in her eyes. The hope was for the treatment. The fear was for Anna. Seeing her hesitation, Leo pressed his advantage. The offer includes a full benefits package, top-tier medical, for you and your family. He let his gaze drift pointedly towards Eleanor. He knew. He hadn't just tracked her IP address. He had investigated her life. The knowledge was a physical blow. This boy hadn't just come here on a whim. He had come prepared. He had mapped out her life, identified her weaknesses, and was now leveraging them against her with the casual cruelty of the truly powerful. He was his father's son, after all. You think you can just show up and buy me? Anna's voice was low, laced with a fury she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. I'm not buying you, Leo corrected smoothly. I'm hiring you. There's a difference. I need your mind, Ms. Reyes. Not your life story. 3 months. You come to our estate in Sterling City, you teach me, you get paid. Then you can come back here to your tomatoes and pretend none of it ever happened. He made it sound so simple, so transactional. But Anna knew it wasn't. Going to Sterling City, to the heart of the corporate world, to the home of Alistair Vance. It was like a moth flying back to the flame that had burned its wings. Vance Industries was too big, too connected. If she re-entered that world even for a moment, the chances of her past finding her would increase exponentially. But then she looked at her grandmother again. Eleanor's hands, gnarled and swollen with arthritis, rested on the worn arms of the rocking chair. She deserved a life free of pain. She deserved the best care money could buy, care that Anna, with all her hidden brilliance, could not provide by selling vegetables at a market stall. The choice was agonizing. Her freedom or her grandmother's health. It was no choice at all. "There will be conditions," Anna said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Leo Vance's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." He walked back to his car, moving with the easy grace of someone who had never lost a battle in his life. He returned with a thin, leather-bound folder and a pen. A contract. Of course. "My father's lawyers are thorough," he said, handing it to her. "It's all in there. Salary terms schedule. And a non-disclosure agreement the length of a short novel. You won't be able to mention our family, my education, or the color of our curtains to anyone ever." Anna took the folder, her fingers tracing the embossed logo on the front, a stylized V. Vance Industries. She didn't need to read the fine print. She knew what these contracts were. They were chains forged of paper and ink. She looked up from the contract, her gaze meeting Leo's over the glossy paper. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and for a moment the quiet tranquility of her sanctuary felt like a memory, a dream from which she was being rudely awakened. Leo Vance stood there, a harbinger of the world she had fought so hard to escape, holding the key to her grandmother's future in one hand and the lock to her own gilded cage in the other. He had won this first engagement, but the look in Anna's eyes was not one of defeat. It was the calm, calculating look of a strategist accepting the terms of a battle she knew had just begun. "When do I start?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. "Tomorrow," Leo replied, his smile unwavering. "A car will be here for you at 6 a.m. The world was still draped in the soft gray light of pre-dawn when the black car returned. It slid up the gravel driveway with a whisper, its powerful engine a low thrum that respected the sleeping town. Anna was already on the porch, a single worn canvas duffel bag at her feet. She had been up for hours methodically packing the few things she would take, and securing the farmhouse, her movements precise and economical, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil raging within her. Eleanor stood in the doorway, wrapped in a thick wool shawl, her face a roadmap of love and worry. She held out a small, gnarled hand. In her palm lay a simple, hand-carved wooden bird, its surface worn smooth with age and touch. It was a meadowlark, the first thing her husband had ever carved for her. "For protection," Eleanor said, her voice raspy. "Your grandfather always said it would find its way home." Anna's carefully constructed walls threatened to crumble. She took the small bird, its familiar weight a comfort in her hand, and closed her fingers around it. "I'll bring it back myself, Nana. I promise." "Be careful, my little bird," Eleanor whispered, pulling her into a fierce, frail hug. "The world of eagles is no place for a sparrow." Anna held her grandmother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and old books. "Don't worry, Nana," she murmured into her shoulder, her voice steady. "This sparrow has claws." She pulled away, gave her grandmother one last long look, and walked towards the car without looking back. She knew if she did, she might not be able to leave. The driver, a large man in a crisp suit, took her bag without a word and opened the rear door for her. The interior of the car was another world. The scent of rich leather and polished wood replaced the earthy smell of the countryside. The door closed with a soft, definitive thud, sealing her in, sealing the world of Havenwood out. As the car pulled away, Anna watched her small farmhouse, the only true home she had ever known, recede in the side mirror until it was swallowed by the morning mist. She slipped the wooden meadowlark into her pocket. The mission had begun. The journey was a study in transitions. The winding country lanes gave way to broader state highways, the green fields and dense forests gradually thinning out to be replaced by the neat, repetitive suburbs of Sterling City's outer limits. Then came the city itself. It rose from the horizon like a serrated blade of glass and steel, a monument to ambition and power. Anna watched the towers claw at the sky, her face impassive, but her mind was a whirlwind. She was re-entering the system, a ghost returning to the machine. She felt the familiar thrum of the city, the pulse of data and commerce, and a part of her she had tried to kill off stirred in recognition. She wasn't Anna the gardener. She was slipping back into the skin of the architect. She mentally reviewed the files she had on Vance Industries, the public reports, the rumored black projects, the profiles of its key executives. She wasn't going in blind. She was never blind. The car exited the main thoroughfare, and began a long, winding ascent up a private road into the hills overlooking the city. The Vance estate was not so much a house as a statement. It was a sprawling structure of white stone sharp angles and vast expanses of dark-tinted glass. It was perched on the cliffside like a predator surveying its territory. High, discreetly electrified walls surrounded the property, and Anna counted at least a dozen visible security cameras before they even reached the main gate, their lenses tracking the car's every move. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress. The gates opened silently, and they swept up a long driveway to the front entrance. The driver opened her door, and she stepped out into a world of curated perfection. The air smelled of money, of meticulously manicured gardens, and chlorinated water from a nearby infinity pool that seemed to spill into the sky. The front door's massive slabs of dark wood and steel were opened by a woman in a severe gray dress. She was in her 50s, with hair pulled back into a tight, unforgiving bun, and an expression of cool professional neutrality. "Miss Reyes," the woman said, her voice crisp and without welcome. "I am Mrs. Davenport, the household manager. Mr. Vance is expecting you. Please follow me." She led Anna through an entrance hall that felt more like the lobby of a modern art museum than a home. The ceilings were impossibly high, the floors were polished marble, and the art on the walls was stark and abstract. The silence here was different from the silence in Havenwood. It was a heavy, sterile silence, the kind that absorbs sound and emotion. They stopped before a set of towering double doors. Mrs. Davenport knocked once, a sharp, precise rap. A deep voice from within commanded enter. Mrs. Davenport opened the door and gestured for Anna to go inside, closing it firmly behind her, leaving her alone with the Titan himself. Alistair Vance's office was designed to intimidate. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking, godlike view of Sterling City below. The desk was a massive piece of polished mahogany, empty, save for a single sleek monitor. And behind it sat the man who ruled this empire. Alistair Vance was in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair, a face that looked like it was carved from granite, and the coldest gray eyes Anna had ever seen. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit and radiated an aura of absolute control. He didn't rise. He simply watched her approach, his eyes dissecting her, dismissing her overalls, her simple canvas shoes, her determinedly plain face. So he began, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. "You're the miracle worker my son has dragged all the way from wherever it is you're from." Anna stopped a respectful 10 feet from his desk. "Mr. Vance, I'll be frank, Miss Reyes. I have reviewed the preliminary background check my team conducted on you. It is sparse. A girl from the country, a high school graduate with unremarkable grades who has spent the last few years caring for a sick relative. Tell me what part of that resume convinced my son you were qualified to tutor him in advanced corporate finance." He was probing, looking for the lie. He didn't believe the official story for a second. "You would have to ask your son that," Anna replied, her voice calm and even. Alistair's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected nervousness, perhaps a fumbling explanation. He had not expected this unnerving placidity. "I am asking you," he pressed. "My son is prone to enthusiasms. Most of them are foolish and expensive. I am trying to determine which category you fall into. I believe you are an opportunist, Miss Reyes, that you have somehow manipulated him for your own financial gain." "Your opinion of me is noted, Mr. Vance," Anna said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It will not affect the quality of my work." A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps even a sliver of surprise, crossed Alistair's face before being suppressed. "Your work. Let us be clear about the terms of your work. The contract you signed stipulates that you are to improve his grades. Let me be more specific." He leaned forward, his hands steepling on the polished desk. "My son is currently failing. I expect him to be in the top 5% of his class by the end of the term. Not just to pass, to excel. If he is not, you will receive nothing. The contract will be terminated and you will be escorted from this property with nothing more than the clothes on your back. Do you understand?" The conditions were indeed impossible. Taking a deliberately failing student to the top of his class in 3 months was a Herculean task. He was setting her up for failure. He wanted her to refuse to argue, to show her hand. "The terms are clear," Anna said simply. Alistair sat back, a little nonplussed by her easy acceptance. He shifted his line of attack. "Furthermore, your presence here is conditional. You will be restricted to your quarters, the library, the dining room, and the west wing where Leo's study is located. You will not entertain guests. You will not wander the grounds. Your communications will be monitored. You are an employee, Miss Reyes, not a guest." "I understand," Anna said. The man's patience was visibly fraying. He was used to people cowering, negotiating, reacting. Anna's serene composure was like a smooth stone wall he couldn't find a crack in. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand before the massive window, his back to her. "I built that city," he said, gesturing with a sweep of his hand. "I built it on logic's strength and the absolute elimination of weakness. I do not tolerate variables I cannot control. You, Miss Reyes, are a variable." He turned to face her, his gray eyes like chips of ice. "Be aware, every move you make in this house will be watched. You are here to do a job and nothing more. Step out of line and you will discover that my resources for dealing with annoyances are considerable." It was a clear threat delivered with the casual authority of a man who had crushed countless people who stood in his way. This was the Alistair Vance the world knew. Anna simply nodded. "Thank you for clarifying my role, Mr. Vance. If that is all, I would like to see my quarters and begin preparing for my first session with Leo." Alistair stared at her for a long moment, a deep furrow forming between his brows. He was utterly confounded. This quiet, plain-looking girl from the countryside was not behaving according to any script he knew. She was either a fool, or she was far more dangerous than she appeared. "Davenport will show you the way," he said, finally dismissing her with a wave of his hand and turning back to his view of the city. Mrs. Davenport was waiting outside the door, her face as impassive as ever. She led Anna through silent, cavernous hallways to a secluded part of the house. The room she was given was beautiful and soulless. It was decorated in muted shades of gray and cream with minimalist furniture, a king-sized bed with a severe-looking headboard, and a wall of glass that looked out onto a small enclosed garden. It was luxurious, but it had the distinct feel of a five-star prison cell. "Your meals will be brought to you here unless you are summoned to dine with the family," Mrs. Davenport stated. "A schedule of Leo's classes and required reading has been placed on the desk. Any requests you have are to be submitted to me in writing." She left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a lock turning. Anna was finally alone. She walked to the window and looked out at the perfectly manicured garden. A high stone wall enclosed it on all sides. She took a deep breath, the air sterile and climate-controlled. She turned and surveyed the room, her eyes cataloging everything. No personal touches. 2 potential surveillance devices hidden in the smoke detector and the television. A pressure sensor under the rug near the door. Amateurish. She placed her duffel bag on the bed and began to unpack. She had brought very little, a few changes of simple practical clothing, a small toiletries bag and 2 books. She placed the clothes in the vast empty closet. Then she took the small wooden meadowlark from her pocket and set it on the polished surface of the nightstand. It looked small and out of place, a tiny piece of organic handcrafted warmth in a world of cold manufactured perfection. It was her anchor. Finally, from a hidden compartment in the lining of her duffel bag, she retrieved her real tools. A burner tablet, a multi-spectrum scanner no bigger than a pen, and a small encrypted drive. She sat on the edge of the bed, the setting sun casting long geometric shadows across the room. She powered on the tablet, its screen bathing her face in a soft blue light. She bypassed the estate's main network, routing her signal through a secure satellite link she maintained for emergencies. She wasn't just a tutor here to do a job. She was an operative deep in hostile territory. And as the city lights began to glitter to life in the window's reflection, Annabelle Reyes, the girl from Havenwood, began her work. Her first task, a full threat assessment of the Vance estate and its formidable owner. The game had changed, and she intended to know all the rules and the players before she made her first move. The library at the Vance estate was a cathedral of knowledge 2 stories high, with towering shelves of leather-bound books, a rolling ladder, and the faint, pleasant scent of aging paper and wood polish. It was a room designed for quiet contemplation and serious study. It was also, at that moment, a battlefield of wills. Leo Vance was sprawled in a plush leather armchair, a 10-pound textbook on macroeconomic theory lying open on his lap, unread. He exuded a kind of aggressive lethargy, his body language a silent protest against his gilded imprisonment. He'd been waiting for 20 minutes, a small act of defiance. When Anna entered, she didn't apologize for her perceived tardiness. She had been precisely on time, waiting outside the door to observe him for a few moments. She took in his posture, the cynical set of his mouth, the way his fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the arm of the chair. He was bored, but he was also sharp, and his boredom was a shield. She ignored the textbook completely. In her hands she held a simple, elegant wooden box. She walked to the large mahogany table in the center of the room and set it down. "Are we going to read this junk, or are you just going to stare at it?" Leo asked, not bothering to look up from his fixed point on the ceiling. Neither Anna replied, her voice calm. She opened the box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, were 2 sets of polished stones, one black, one white. A go board was folded neatly alongside them. "We're going to play a game." That got his attention. Leo slowly sat up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "A game. My father is paying you a king's ransom to teach me, and you want to play board games." "Go is not a board game," Anna corrected, gently unfolding the board. The grid of 19x19 lines was stark and intimidating. It's a model of conflict resource allocation and strategic dominance. It has more possible moves than there are atoms in the known universe. It's far more complex than anything in that book. She gestured towards the textbook without looking at it. A flicker of interest sparked in Leo's eyes. He was a natural competitor, and he was intrigued by her audacity. He swung his legs off the armchair and sauntered over to the table, a cocky smirk on his face. "Fine. I'll humor you. I've played a bit. You'll find I'm a quick study." For the next hour, they played in near silence. Leo, true to his word, was a quick and aggressive player. He attacked relentlessly, seeking to capture her stones to claim large, obvious swaths of territory. Anna's play was the opposite. She was quiet, patient, almost passive. Her stones were placed in seemingly disconnected, humble positions. She gave up territory, allowed her stones to be threatened, and built small, unassuming pockets of influence. Leo was winning, and he knew it. He was dominating the board. The smirk on his face grew. "Not much of a challenge, Tutor," he taunted. Anna didn't reply. She simply placed another white stone in a seemingly innocuous position. 10 moves later, the entire dynamic of the board collapsed. Leo stared, his smirk vanishing, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Anna's scattered passive stones were not random. They were a net. And with that last quiet move, she had drawn the net closed. His vast aggressive armies were suddenly cut off, their supply lines severed. His territory, which had seemed so secure, was now dead, useless space. She hadn't defeated him. She had allowed him to defeat himself. How Leo breathed, looking from the board to her face. "You saw the board as a series of battles," Anna explained, her voice even. "You focused on capturing soldiers. I saw it as a map of influence. I focused on controlling the supply lines and communication hubs. You won every battle, but I won the war before it even started." "Your textbook," she said, finally nodding towards the tome, "will teach you the names of the battles. My job is to teach you how to see the map." For the first time since she'd arrived, Leo looked at her with something other than suspicion or arrogance. It was respect. Their lessons transformed after that day. The library was abandoned. Anna's methods were as unconventional as she was. One afternoon they stood in the estate's state-of-the-art kitchen. Anna had lined up a dozen different bottles of imported sauces and spices on the vast marble island. "This is your supply chain," she said, pointing to the array. "You need to get this bottle of artisanal ketchup from a small farm in Italy to a supermarket shelf in New York. You have to account for shipping tariffs, spoilage, and currency fluctuations. The salt represents a sudden trade embargo. The pepper is a dock workers' strike. Go." Leo, who had once fallen asleep in his logistics lectures, was now animatedly moving bottles around, debating the merits of air freight versus sea cargo, a new light of understanding dawning in his eyes. Another day they walked through the enclosed garden while discussing hostile takeovers. "This rosebush is your target company," Anna said, stopping before a prize-winning hybrid. "It's beautiful, valuable, and well-established, but it has a weakness." She pointed to the root system. "Its supplier of a specific nutrient is unreliable. You don't attack the bush directly. You buy the supplier. You control the nutrient. You make the rosebush dependent on you. Then you acquire it for a fraction of its value." Her examples were simple, tangible, and devastatingly effective. She was translating the abstract language of high finance into the ruthless logic of strategy. Leo absorbed it all, his mind, so long dulled by rote learning, now firing on all cylinders. He began to look forward to their sessions, to the intellectual sparring, to the challenge she presented. The change did not go unnoticed. Alistair Vance sat in his office reading an email from Leo's finance professor. It noted a sudden and remarkable improvement in Leo's grasp of the material, and more surprisingly, in his incisive and often unorthodox strategic insights during class discussions. Alistair lowered the tablet, a deep frown on his face. This was what he wanted, yet it disturbed him profoundly. The girl was producing results that multiple high-priced Ivy League-educated tutors had failed to achieve. This made her more dangerous, not less. An opportunist he could understand and crush. An enigma who could actually tame his rebellious son was a variable he could not quantify, and Alistair Vance hated nothing more than an unquantifiable variable. His surveillance had revealed nothing. She stayed in her designated areas, her communications were clean. She did nothing but her job. It was a perfect performance, and that in itself was deeply suspicious. The catalyst for the next phase arrived a week later. Alistair had convened a meeting of his senior executives at the estate, a rare occurrence reserved for matters of the highest importance. They were gathered on a sprawling terrace overlooking the city, discussing a new aggressive push into the AI defense sector. Among them was Marcus Thorne, the chief operating officer of Vance Industries. Thorne was everything Alistair valued in a subordinate, brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. He was younger than the other executives, with sharp predatory features, impeccably tailored suits, and a reputation for corporate bloodshed. He was Alistair's heir apparent and his most dangerous internal rival. During a break in the meeting, Thorne stood by the balustrade nursing a glass of sparkling water. His gaze drifted down to the west garden where he saw Leo and a young woman walking along a path deep in conversation. Leo was gesturing animatedly at a tablet, his face alive with an enthusiasm Thorne had never seen in the boy. The young woman listened, her posture one of quiet, focused intensity. She said something, and Leo stopped, his expression shifting to one of deep thought. Even from this distance, Thorne could feel the strange power dynamic. The boy was the student, but the woman was in absolute command of the situation. A cold prickle of unease, sharp and unwelcome, went down Thorne's spine. It was a feeling he hadn't had in years, the instinctual alarm of a predator sensing another unknown predator in its territory. There was something about her, a disciplined economy of movement, a way of holding herself that was at odds with the role of a simple tutor. He turned to Alistair, who had joined him at the railing. Alistair, who was the young woman with Leo. He asked, his tone casual. New staff. Alistair followed his gaze, his expression unreadable. Just a tutor. Some girl he found in the countryside. He seems to be responding to her for now. Alistair's voice was dismissive, a carefully crafted mask for his own churning thoughts. She seems composed. Thorne observed, his eyes narrowing slightly. She doesn't carry herself like a teacher. More like a... well, I'm not sure. What's her name? Reyes. Annabelle Reyes, Alistair said. The name meant nothing to Thorne. He searched his memory, a vast and detailed archive of names, faces, and connections. Nothing. And yet the feeling of wrongness persisted. It was like finding a single line of ghost code in a supposedly secure system, meaningless on its own, but a potential indicator of a much deeper breach. He watched as Anna looked up, as if sensing his gaze. For a single fleeting second, her eyes met his across the vast distance. He saw no deference, no intimidation. He saw only a cool, analytical intelligence before she turned her attention back to Leo. The meeting resumed, but Thorne's mind was elsewhere. He was a man who had built his career on recognizing patterns and neutralizing threats before they could fully materialize. This girl was a deviation from the pattern. Later that evening, as he was driven back to his penthouse in the city, Marcus Thorne made a call. He didn't use his company phone. He used a burner, dialing a number known to only a handful of people. It's me, he said when the call was answered. I need a deep background check run. Name is Annabelle Reyes. He spelled it out. Currently residing at the Vance estate. There was a pause on the other end. The official one is already on file. Clean as a whistle. The official one is useless. Thorne snapped, his voice a low hiss. I want the real one. I want to know where she was born, who her parents were, every school she attended, every place she ever worked, every friend she ever had. I want to know what she had for breakfast a year ago. I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. Dig until you find something. He ended the call and stared out at the glittering lights of the city, Alistair Vance's city. For years, Thorne had worked to become indispensable, to make himself the logical, inevitable successor to the throne. This girl, this Annabelle Reyes, felt like a stone tossed into the placid waters of his carefully laid plans. And Marcus Thorne always removed the stones. Marcus Thorne's private investigation had yielded precisely nothing, a result that infuriated and alarmed him in equal measure. The report on Annabelle Reyes was a masterpiece of blandness. It painted a picture of a life so ordinary it was practically invisible. There were no hidden bank accounts, no suspicious travel records, no criminal history, not even a speeding ticket. It was a digital ghost, a life with no edges, no depth. A professionally constructed identity. Thorne sat in his penthouse office, the city lights a glittering carpet below, and felt the familiar cold thrill of the hunt. He knew this kind of clean. It was the digital equivalent of a room wiped clean of fingerprints. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she was a professional. And her presence in the Vance household, wrapped in this cloak of manufactured normalcy, was an anomaly he could not afford to ignore. He needed data. Not the kind you could buy from information brokers, but the kind a person only reveals under extreme pressure. He needed to see her react, to strip away the placid Tutor persona and see the machinery underneath. He swiveled in his chair and brought up a schematic on his monitor. It was a detailed blueprint of the Vance estate's security and automation system, a system he himself had recommended Alistair install years ago. And like any good architect, he had built himself a private, undocumented backdoor. It was time he decided to orchestrate an accident. A week later, Anna and Leo were in the solarium, a stunning glass-walled room on the estate's western edge that housed a collection of exotic plants. It was a gray, rainy afternoon, and the rhythmic drumming of water on the glass roof created a soothing, hypnotic atmosphere. They were working on a complex derivatives problem, the transparent data screen between them glowing with charts and equations. Leo, for once, was completely absorbed. Anna's teaching had unlocked a part of his mind he never knew he had. He was starting to see the world as she did, a series of interconnected systems puzzles waiting to be solved. So the risk isn't in the initial investment, Leo murmured, tracing a line on the screen. It's in the tertiary exposure to the currency swap. They've hidden the liability. They haven't hidden it, Anna corrected softly. They've merely disguised it as an asset. Most people don't look past the disguise. It was in that moment of shared intellectual focus that Thorne made his move. Miles away in his silent office, he typed a single elegant line of code into his terminal and hit enter. The effect was instantaneous. With a deep, resonant thud, heavy metal storm shutters began to descend over the glass walls of the solarium, their motors whining as they sealed them off from the outside world. Daylight was sliced away, plunging the room into an abrupt, disorienting darkness, relieved only by the glow of the data screen. Simultaneously, the main door slid shut with the heavy final click of an electromagnetic lock. What the hell? Leo jumped to his feet, spinning around. Dad's stupid security drills again. The timing is impeccable. He strode to the door and shoved at it. It didn't budge. He slammed his fist against the steel panel. Hello, anyone out there? Very funny. There was no response. The intercom panel next to the door was dark. A soft hiss emanated from the ceiling vents. A thin, white, odorless vapor began to curl into the room. It wasn't smoke, but it clouded the air, distorting the light from the data screen into hazy, confusing patterns. What is that? Leo coughed, his anger turning to genuine alarm. Is that smoke? He rushed to the intercom again, pressing the dead buttons frantically. Mrs. Davenport's security. Anna had not moved. When the shutters descended, her entire being had gone still, her posture shifting from relaxed Tutor to coiled alertness. The Tutor was gone. The architect was in control. Her mind processed the data with cold, detached speed. Environment sealed, visuals obscured, external communication severed. Unidentified vapor introduced. It was a classic disorientation protocol. A test. Panic is a useless response, Leo, she said, her voice cutting through the hiss of the vapor. It was shockingly calm, devoid of any fear. Breathe slowly. It's not smoke. It's designed to confuse, not harm. Conserve your energy. Leo stopped shouting, turning to stare at her. In the eerie glow of the screen, her face was a mask of placid concentration. She was scanning the room, her eyes missing nothing, her head tilted as if listening to a sound he couldn't hear. How can you be so calm? He demanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. We're locked in and the room is filling with God knows what. Because this isn't an accident, she stated, simply walking towards the main control panel on the wall, her steps measured and sure. This is a message, or a question. She ran her fingers over the dark touchscreen. It was completely dead. A novice would have given up. Anna knelt, her eyes examining the base of the panel. She pulled a single sturdy pin from the simple bun at the nape of her neck, the dark hair cascading down her back. With the focus of a surgeon, she inserted the pin into a nearly invisible seam at the bottom of the panel's casing and pried it open with a soft click. Leo watched, utterly mesmerized. The interior of the panel was a dense, complex web of fiber optics and circuit boards. It looked like the inside of a bomb. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "High school robotics club," she murmured, her eyes scanning the circuitry. Her mind was mapping the system, identifying the power lines, the data hubs, the command pathways. She saw the override, a secondary circuit deliberately isolated from the main board, a failsafe, or in this case, a vulnerability. Her fingers, nimble and precise, went to work. Using the metal pin, she created a bridge between two specific terminals. A shower of small, harmless sparks erupted. The main data screen flickered and died, plunging them into absolute blackness for a terrifying second. Leo swore under his breath. Then, with a low hum, the emergency lights in the ceiling flickered on, casting the vapor-filled room in a stark, clinical red glow. A moment later, they heard the pneumatic hiss of the locks disengaging. Anna pushed the door. It slid open smoothly. She stepped out into the pristine white hallway, Leo right behind her, blinking in the normal light. Mrs. Davenport and two burly security guards were hurrying towards them, their faces a carefully rehearsed pantomime of concern. "Miss Reyes, Leo. Are you all right?" the household manager exclaimed. "There seems to have been a catastrophic malfunction in the solarium's automation system. We were about to breach the door." Leo wasn't buying it. His face was pale with anger. "A malfunction? That system is triple redundant with its own power supply. That wasn't a glitch." He snarled, his eyes locking onto the lead security guard. "That was deliberate. Who was in the security nexus?" "No one, sir," the guard said smoothly. "The system is fully automated. We are running a diagnostic now." Leo turned his gaze to Anna. The suspicion and question in his eyes were now a raging fire. "How did you do that?" he demanded, his voice low and intense. "Forget the robotics club. You bypassed Vance Industries' military-grade security panel like you were making toast. Who are you?" Before Anna could formulate a placating lie, Alistair Vance's voice boomed down the hall. "What is the meaning of this?" He strode towards them, his face a thundercloud of fury. In his office, Marcus Thorne watched the scene unfold on a silent, encrypted feed. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. He hadn't gotten the panic he'd half expected. He had gotten something infinitely more interesting. He had gotten confirmation. The way she had analyzed the situation, her preternatural calm, her expert bypass of a system he himself had designed to be nearly impenetrable, it was the work of a highly trained, elite-level operative. His unease had not been misplaced. Annabelle Reyes was not a tutor. She was a threat of the highest order. Now he just had to figure out who she was working for. Later that night, Anna stood in her silent gray room. She had refused dinner, pleading a headache. The events of the afternoon played over and over in her mind, not as a memory, but as raw data to be analyzed. The sequence was too perfect. The lockdown, the vapor, the communications blackout. It wasn't designed to harm. It was designed to isolate, disorient, and observe the subject's response. It was a classic psychological probe, a tactic straight from the playbook of her former life, the life of the architect. It wasn't a random attack. It was a test. And by passing it so flawlessly, she had confirmed the enemy's suspicions. She had been so careful, so disciplined, but the moment she had been put under pressure, her training, her very nature had taken over. Her quiet life was over. The fortress of tranquility she had built in Havenwood had been breached. She was no longer hiding. She was in the game again, whether she wanted to be or not. And her opponent was here inside these walls, someone with intimate knowledge of the estate's systems and a deep personal interest in her. She walked to the nightstand and picked up the small wooden meadowlark. Its smooth, worn surface felt cool against her skin. It was a relic from a life of peace, a life that was now impossibly far away. She closed her hand around it, her knuckles white. A quiet, cold resolve settled over her. They had come for her. They had tested her. Now it was her turn to start asking the questions. The prey was about to become the hunter. The solarium incident had shattered the fragile peace of Leo's world. His life, once a predictable landscape of boredom and rebellion, now held a single consuming mystery: Annabelle Reyes. The image of her kneeling before the sparking security panel, her face illuminated by the glow of raw circuitry. Her calm and island in his panic was burned into his mind. It was the image of a wolf that had for some reason been pretending to be a sheep. He was no longer just a student, he was an investigator. His nights transformed. Sleep became a low priority. Surrounded by the glow of multiple monitors in his study, a room his father had equipped with technology that could rival a small country's intelligence agency, Leo went hunting. He dove into the digital ocean searching for the ghost that was his tutor. He was not without skill. Growing up as Alistair Vance's son meant having access to the best tools and a deep intuitive understanding of the digital world. He started with the basics, running her name through every public and private database he could access. The results were infuriatingly consistent. Annabelle Reyes of Havenwood, born 24 years ago. High school records unremarkable. No university. No driver's license until 3 years ago. No credit history before that. No social media presence, not even a forgotten, embarrassing teenage profile. Before the age of 21, she simply did not exist. He pushed deeper, using backdoors his father would have been furious to know he possessed. He sliced into county records, hospital archives, federal census data. Nothing. It was a digital dead end. Her entire identity seemed to have been born on the day she registered as her grandmother's legal guardian in Havenwood. Frustrated, he leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in the silent room. A perfect cover. It wasn't the lack of information that was suspicious. It was the flawless, seamless nature of it. No one had a pass that clean. Everyone left Echo's digital breadcrumbs. Anna's trail didn't just run cold. It started on a cliff edge, as if she had been dropped into existence from another dimension. The next afternoon, he cornered her in the library. She was reading a book on ancient military strategy, a topic far removed from his curriculum. "I spent all night looking for you," he said, his voice quiet but intense. He stood in front of her, blocking her light. "For the real you. For Cassandra. For the woman who hotwired my father's security system with a hairpin. You don't exist before 3 years ago." "Who are you, Anna?" Anna slowly placed a bookmark in her book and closed it. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, but a weary kind of warning. "I'm your tutor, Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Alistair Vance is paying me a great deal of money to ensure you pass your exams. That is who I am. That is all that matters. Now, shall we discuss the arbitrage theory, or would you prefer to continue your creative writing exercise?" It was a dismissal, polite and absolute, but it was also a challenge. She was telling him to back off, but her refusal to deny his accusation was in itself a confirmation. He held her gaze for a long moment, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between them. He had no leverage, no proof, nothing but his own certainty. He backed down for now, but the investigation was far from over. While Leo hunted for her past, Anna was engaged in a far more dangerous search for her present. She knew the accident in the solarium was a professionally executed probe. That meant she was no longer just hiding. She was being actively hunted. The first rule of survival was to identify the hunter. Her small gray room became her operations center. After Mrs. Davenport made her final rounds and the house settled into its deep, wealthy slumber, Anna would go to work. The Vance estate was a digital fortress, but every fortress has cracks. She moved through its network with the silent, patient skill of a saboteur, a ghost in its own machine. She wasn't looking for data. She was looking for shadows. She performed a deep passive network analysis, searching for anomalies, a packet of data that didn't belong, a signal routed through an unofficial channel, a whisper in the digital storm. After 2 nights of meticulous searching, she found it. It was a tiny, elegant piece of malware, a parasite latched onto the encrypted feed of the estate's primary security system. It was a ghost feed siphoning off a duplicate of all surveillance data and routing it out of the estate through a heavily cloaked series of nodes. It was the digital equivalent of a wiretap, and it was the work of a master. Alistair Vance's official security team, for all their resources, had missed it completely. They were looking for brute force attacks for alarms, This was a scalpel, not a hammer. Anna began the painstaking process of tracing the signal's destination. It was like following a single strand of silk through a hurricane. The signal bounced from a server in Iceland to a data farm in Singapore, then through a dead drop in Eastern Europe. Each layer was protected by layers of shell corporations and firewalls. As she peeled back the third layer, her breath caught in her throat. The encryption architecture, it was familiar. It had a certain style, a signature arrogance in its complexity. It was the work of a man she had prayed she would never encounter again. A man who had been the chief architect of her old employer's darkest projects. A man whose digital fingerprints were all over the catastrophe that had ruined her life. A memory sharp and unwelcome flashed through her mind. The smell of burning servers, the piercing shriek of alarms, the face of her mentor David shouting at her over the chaos. "It's a trap, Anna. They're purging the project. Run, get out now." The ceiling collapsing. The searing pain. Betrayal. She shook her head, forcing the memory down. That was the past. This was now. Her focus narrowed. Who at Vance Industries would have the skill, the access, and the motive to use these specific protocols? The list was vanishingly small. Her suspicion, born from a gut feeling on the terrace, now had a name: Marcus Thorne. She pivoted her investigation. Using a series of carefully constructed, spoofed identities, she began to probe the outer layers of Thorne's personal and corporate digital life. It was like approaching a sleeping dragon. One wrong move, one tripped wire, and he would know he was being watched. The silent, deadly game of cat and mouse intensified. One night, as she was deep inside a server belonging to one of Thorne's suspected shell corporations, a silent alarm on her tablet alerted her to an unscheduled proximity alert. Footsteps in the hall. Mrs. Davenport. With a speed that was pure instinct, Anna killed the connection, wiped the tablet's session memory, and slid the device under her mattress. She dove into bed, pulling the covers up just as a key turned in the lock. The door opened a crack. Mrs. Davenport peered in her sharp eyes, scanning the moonlit room. She saw only the form of the tutor, seemingly fast asleep. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she closed the door with a soft click. Anna lay perfectly still for 10 full minutes, her heart pounding, before she retrieved her tablet. It had been a random check. Or perhaps it hadn't been. Leo, in his own way, became her unwitting accomplice. His newfound intellectual curiosity meant he was constantly pushing boundaries, demanding access to restricted company data for research, and engaging in late-night coding projects that occasionally triggered low-level security alerts. His chaotic privilege movements created noise in the system, a digital smokescreen that helped mask Anna's far quieter, more deliberate incursions. On the 5th night of her investigation, she broke through. She found a vulnerability in the firewall of a holding company based in the Cayman Islands, a company she had linked to Thorne. Inside, buried in a folder of encrypted financial transactions, she found a payment ledger, and on it a name. It was the name of a freelance mercenary, a specialist in corporate extractions and problem-solving. A man who had been on Thorne's private payroll during the Project Icarus disaster. A man who, according to the official report she herself had read 3 years ago, had died in the fire. Anna stared at the name on the screen, her blood turning to ice. He was alive, and he was still working for Thorne. Her worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just a random echo of her past. The man who had orchestrated her ruin was here at the pinnacle of Vance Industries, and he was actively using the same violent assets he had used to bury the truth 3 years ago. She was not just a person of interest. She was a loose end, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone exactly how Marcus Thorne dealt with loose ends. Alistair Vance did not believe in coincidences. He believed in patterns, data, and the predictable, often disappointing patterns of human behavior. Greed, ambition, fear. These were the reliable metrics upon which he had built his empire. Annabelle Reyes, however, did not fit any established pattern. She remained an infuriating, unsolvable equation. The most galling part was that she was succeeding. Wildly. He had seen it himself. He'd walked past the library a few days prior, the doors slightly ajar, and stopped, arrested by the sound of his son's voice. It wasn't the sullen monotone he was used to. It was engaged, sharp, argumentative. But that assumes a stable geopolitical climate, Leo was saying, his voice ringing with conviction. If you factor in the instability in the South China Sea, their entire shipping lane becomes a liability. You can't build a 10-year strategy on a 30-day piece. Good Anna's voice replied calm and measured. You've identified the primary external threat. Now how do you mitigate it? Not just with a contingency plan. How do you turn their greatest weakness into your greatest strength? Alistair had stood there unseen in the hallway, a profound sense of dislocation washing over him. The words, the concepts, they were his own. It was the kind of ruthless, predatory thinking he had spent a lifetime perfecting. To hear it coming from his son, guided by this plain-looking girl from the middle of nowhere, was both deeply gratifying and profoundly unsettling. Then there was the solarium incident. The official report, a thick file of technical jargon and inconclusive diagnostics, sat on his desk. Cascading system failure due to an unforeseen power surge, it concluded. It was nonsense. The estate's systems were designed to withstand a lightning strike. What had happened was a surgical strike as precise and deliberate as an assassination. The fact that the only two people involved were his son and this enigmatic tutor was a data point that screamed for attention. He summoned Arthur Croft, the head of his personal security detail. Croft was a former MI6 officer, a man of few words and unnerving competence, who had been with Alistair for 2 decades. He was the only man Alistair trusted to handle matters that required absolute discretion. The file you gave me on Annabelle Reyes is an insult to my intelligence, Alistair said without preamble, gesturing to a thin folder on his desk. It's a ghost story, a work of fiction. Croft, a tall man with a face that seemed permanently weary, did not react. The data is accurate, sir. There is nothing more in the official records. Then go beyond the official records, Alistair commanded, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Use the off-the-books resources, the ones we don't speak about. I want to know who laundered her identity. I want to know who she was before she became this gardener. I don't care about legalities or cost. I want the truth, Arthur. Find it. Understood, Sir, Croft said, and with a slight nod he was gone. Anna felt the shift immediately. It was a subtle change in the digital atmosphere of the estate. The passive surveillance she was used to was replaced by something far more active, more invasive. New algorithms were sniffing at the network traffic. Sophisticated probes were testing for unauthorized devices. It was Croft's work. She recognized his signature from the research she'd done on Vance's inner circle. The real investigation had begun. She pulled back, erasing her digital tracks and going dark. Her hunt for Thorne would have to wait. For now, her primary mission was to maintain her cover. She became the perfect tutor, her focus entirely on Leo. Their relationship was evolving. The intellectual respect had deepened into a fragile, unspoken alliance. Leo had stopped asking her who she was, not because he'd lost interest, but because he seemed to understand that the question itself was dangerous. Instead, he watched her, his sharp eyes missing nothing, filing away the small inconsistencies, the way she always positioned herself with her back to a wall, the way her eyes scanned a room when she first entered it, the brief, hard look that would flash across her face when she thought he wasn't looking. He knew she was in some kind of trouble, and a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed began to stir. He started talking more during their sessions, not just about coursework, but about the company, about his father, about the executives like Thorne, whom he instinctively disliked. He was unknowingly feeding her the intelligence she could no longer gather for herself. Days later, Croft stood in Alistair's office once more. "We've hit the same wall as before," he reported, his tone flat. "Her identity for the past 3 years is a construct, but it's flawless. Whoever created it was an expert of the highest caliber. There are no direct links to a prior life." Alistair's jaw tightened. "Nothing is flawless, Arthur." "Perhaps not," Croft conceded. "We found one anomaly. It's not a link to her, but to her grandmother, Eleanor Reyes." He placed a tablet on the desk. 3 years ago, Mrs. Reyes's significant medical expenses at the Havenwood Clinic were paid for by an anonymous benevolent fund. And Alistair prompted, impatient. "We trace the fund. It's a dead end, a series of impenetrable financial cutouts. However, the seed money to establish that fund came from a one-time Vance Industries corporate disbursement made over 3 years ago. It was from a program titled the Bereavement and Relocation Fund." Alistair stared at him. "For what purpose?" "It was established," Croft said, his voice lowering slightly, "for the families of employees involved in a single catastrophic incident, a project that was subsequently expunged from all active corporate records." Croft hesitated. "The project was designated by a code name, Sir." A low cold dread began to pool in Alistair's stomach. What was the name? Project Icarus. The name struck Alistair Vance like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs, a sudden roaring in his ears. It was a name from a corporate tomb, a ghost he had buried under a mountain of money, legal firewalls, and non-disclosure agreements a lifetime ago. A name he never ever expected to hear spoken in this office again. His mind for a moment reeled back in time. The frantic phone calls, the reports of a fire and explosion, the containment teams, the ruthlessly efficient cleanup, the lies told to the board, to the media. The secret had been kept. It had to be. With an effort that felt physical, he regained his composure. His face was a pale, rigid mask. Get me the unredacted Icarus personnel file, the Alpha Clearance Archive. Sir Croft said carefully, that file is sealed under your own executive order. Then unseal it, Alistair bit out. It took 20 minutes, an eternity, during which Alistair stood at his window staring at the city he had built, feeling as though the foundations were cracking beneath his feet. Finally, Croft returned with a tablet which he placed on the desk. The file is loaded, sir. Alistair waited until Croft had left the room before he sat down and touched the screen. The file opened a long list of names against the stark white background of a heavily classified document. Vance Industries' brightest minds, all recruited for his most ambitious, most secret, and ultimately most disastrous project. He scanned the names, most of which were followed by a single chilling word: deceased. He scrolled to the Strategy and Analytics Division. He saw the name of David Chen, his former protege, a man whose brilliance had been like a son's to him. Deceased. Alistair's heart gave a painful throb. He forced himself to look at the name directly below it, the file of David's own hand-picked mentee. A prodigy they had recruited straight from her doctoral program, a strategist of almost frightening talent. The file photo showed a young woman barely 20 with dark, intense eyes that burned with intelligence and ambition. Her security clearance was designated architect level. Her file was marked with a single chilling addendum, status unknown. Presumed deceased in Icarus incident. Her name was not Annabelle Reyes, but the face, it was undeniably her. It was the face of the quiet, unassuming girl who was at this very moment in his library teaching his son. The pieces slammed into place in Alistair's mind with the force of a physical impact. Her impossible skills, her manufactured past, the surgical precision of the solarium incident, her unnerving calm. The name of the project he had tried to erase from history. She wasn't an opportunist. She wasn't a spy from a rival corporation. She was a ghost. She was a survivor of Project Icarus. A survivor of the fire and the betrayal and the cover-up. A loose end of the most dangerous kind imaginable. Alistair Vance leaned back in his chair, a sensation he hadn't felt in 30 years washing over him, pure, unadulterated shock. He finally knew her identity. And it was a truth more terrifying than any scenario he could have possibly conceived. Marcus Thorne believed in decisive action. For weeks he had been circling the enigma of Annabelle Reyes, probing her defenses, trying to decipher her purpose. But his patience had worn thin. The girl was a professional of that, he was certain. Her continued presence in the Vance household was an unacceptable risk, a loose thread that could unravel the entire tapestry of his career. It was time to pull that thread violently. He wouldn't be so crude as to stage a hit at the estate. Alistair's fortress was impenetrable, and the blowback would be uncontrollable. No, the solution required finesse. He needed to draw her out onto his own carefully chosen battlefield. The opportunity presented itself on a silver platter. Leo, as part of his applied business curriculum devised by Anna, was scheduled to tour Vance Robotics, a subsidiary located in a sterile industrial park on the city's fringe. It was the perfect venue, controlled, private, and plausibly vulnerable. From his penthouse, Thorne made a call on an encrypted line. "Silas," he said, his voice flat and cold. "The asset I told you about. She'll be at the Phoenix facility with the boy at 1400 hours tomorrow. I want her. The boy is the pretext. Make it look like a botched kidnapping. He is not to be harmed, but you can be convincing. The girl, however, is to be neutralized. I don't want a body, I don't want a mess. I just want her gone. Am I clear?" As glass, a gravelly voice on the other end replied, "Consider the package erased." The air at the robotics facility felt wrong. Anna had felt it the moment they stepped out of the armored sedan. It was too quiet. The usual hum of activity in a high-tech lab, The whir of machinery, the chatter of engineers was muted. It felt like a stage waiting for the actors. "Something's not right," she said to Leo as they concluded their tour, her voice a low murmur. "We should leave now." Leo, engrossed in a discussion with the lab's director about neural network processors, waved a dismissive hand. "You're being paranoid, Anna. This place has more security than the Pentagon." Her instincts, honed in environments far more dangerous than this, screamed at her. She didn't argue. She simply placed a hand on Leo's arm, her grip surprisingly firm. "The tour is over." Her tone brooked no argument. Leo, surprised by her sudden authority, acquiesced. They made their excuses and headed for the exit that led to the multi-level parking garage. Their assigned Vance security guard, a burly man named Harris, walked a few paces ahead, looking bored. The garage was cavernous, eerily empty, the afternoon light filtering through the concrete slats and dusty stripes. Their sedan was parked 100 feet away, a lone black island in a sea of empty spaces. The sound of their footsteps echoed unnaturally. It happened with breathtaking speed. A nondescript gray van which had been parked silently in a far corner roared to life. Its tires screeched as it accelerated, not towards the exit, but directly at them, cutting off their path to the car. Harris reacted instantly, his hand going to the gun under his jacket. "Get back behind me, Mr. Vance." The van's side door slid open before it had even stopped moving. Two men clad in black tactical gear and full-face masks leaped out. They moved with the fluid, deadly economy of trained soldiers. The first man fired a weapon that made a soft phut sound. Harris grunted, a small dart protruding from his neck, and crumpled to the ground unconscious. Leo froze his mind, unable to process the sudden, shocking violence. One moment he was discussing AI, the next he was facing two armed men and his bodyguard was down. This wasn't a corporate drill. This was real. In that frozen moment, Anna moved. The quiet tutor, the calm intellectual, vanished as if she had never been. In her place was a creature of pure, coiled efficiency. She grabbed the collar of Leo's expensive jacket and hurled him backwards with surprising strength. "Get behind the pillar!" "Stay down!" she commanded, her voice a blade of steel. She didn't run. She advanced. The first attacker raised his tranquilizer rifle, aiming at her. He never had a chance to fire. Anna closed the distance in 3 explosive steps. She deflected the barrel of the weapon upwards with her left hand, while her right hand, balled into a tight fist, struck the side of his neck with brutal precision. The man gagged, his eyes wide with shock, and collapsed, his weapon clattering to the concrete. The second man, seeing his partner fall, abandoned the tranquilizer and drew a handgun equipped with a suppressor. Leo, peeking from behind the concrete pillar, felt his heart seize. Anna was unarmed, exposed, but she wasn't. Before the gunman could acquire a target, Anna had scooped up the fallen tranquilizer rifle. It was a clumsy, short-range weapon, but she didn't fire it. Holding it by the barrel, she swung it in a low, vicious arc, smashing it into the gunman's knee. There was a sickening crunch. The man screamed, his leg buckling, and as he fell, Anna was already on him. She wrenched the handgun from his grasp, twisted his arm into a lock that made him howl in agony, and put him to sleep with a sharp blow to the temple. It had taken less than 5 seconds. 2 trained operatives neutralized. A third figure emerged from the van. He was taller than the others and unmasked. He had a hard, scarred face and cold, dead eyes. He held his handgun with the practiced ease of a man who had used it many times. He was Silas. He looked at the 2 downed men, then at Anna, who now stood in a perfect combat stance, the captured handgun held steady in a 2-handed grip. A flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition, crossed his face. He'd seen that brutal, efficient style before. "The hell?" he breathed. Then his eyes widened. "It is you." "I don't believe it." "The architect. Thorne is going to be very, very pleased." The name hit Anna like a physical blow, confirming everything. It was Thorne, and he had sent a ghost from her past to kill her. "Silas," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "They told me you burned." "Reports were exaggerated," he said with a predator's grin. "Looks like the reports on you were too. The boss wants you gone." Quietly. "But since you've made a mess, I'll just have to settle for loud." He raised his weapon, but Anna was already moving. She fired 2 quick shots, not at him, but at the sprinkler head on the ceiling directly above him. Water and fire-retardant foam gushed down, drenching Silas and obscuring his vision. At the same time, the piercing shriek of the fire alarm began to fill the garage. Chaos erupted. While Silas sputtered and wiped the foam from his eyes, Anna grabbed a terrified, paralyzed Leo and pulled him towards the emergency exit. "Move now." Back in his office, Alistair Vance's secure line chirped. It was Croft. "Sir, there's been an incident at the Phoenix facility. An attempt on Mr. Vance's son." Alistair's blood ran cold. "Is he all right?" "He is secure, sir. The Tutor. She engaged the hostiles." "Patch me into the garage surveillance feed." Now Alistair commanded. The feed appeared on his main monitor. The images were grainy, chaotic, the alarm blaring through the speakers. But the content was terrifyingly clear. He saw the van, the professional takedown of his guard. He saw his son, his only son, frozen in terror. And then he saw her. He saw Annabelle Reyes transform. He watched his jaws slack as she dismantled two armed men with a speed and brutality that belonged on a battlefield. He watched her handle the captured firearm not like a frightened civilian, but like a seasoned special forces operator. He watched her tactical use of the environment, her cold, calculated precision under fire. And then he saw Silas, a man on Thorne's unofficial payroll, a man who was supposed to be a corpse buried in the ashes of the Icarus facility. He strained to hear the audio feed over the blaring alarm. "The architect. Thorne is going to be very, very pleased." The final piece of the puzzle, the one he had been staring at for days, slammed into place with the force of a tectonic shift. It wasn't just a survivor. It was her. The project's lead strategist. The one who designed the entire system. The primary witness. The one Thorne had been sent to clean up after the disaster. The kidnapping was a lie. This was a targeted assassination 3 years in the making. And his son. Thorne had used his son as bait. A rage so pure and so cold it felt like a physical entity filled Alistair's entire being. The rage of a father. The rage of a king discovering a viper coiled at the heart of his court. In the back of an armored SUV speeding back towards the estate and surrounded by a phalanx of security vehicles, Leo finally found his voice. He stared at Anna, who was calmly checking the handgun's magazine before rendering it safe. Her knuckles were bruised and there was a smear of grease on her cheek, but otherwise she seemed completely unaffected. Who are you, Leo? Whispered the question, filled with awe and terror. Anna met his gaze, and for the first time he saw the full crushing weight of the past in her eyes. The scene cut. Back in Alistair's office, the CEO stood up his hands, gripping the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles white. The shock was gone, replaced by a murderous calm. He looked at the face of Marcus Thorne smiling in a corporate photo on his wall. He picked up his most secure phone, the one connected to a direct, untraceable line. He knew who he had to talk to. He had to form an alliance with the ghost who lived in his house. The ride back to the Vance estate was a study in silence. The armored SUV sliced through the city traffic, a cocoon of tense quiet amidst the urban chaos. Leo sat opposite Anna, his gaze fixed on her. He wasn't looking at his tutor anymore. He was looking at a complete stranger, a woman who had moved with the lethal grace of a predator and spoken the name of her attacker with the cold familiarity of a fellow soldier. The questions burned in his throat, but the shock had rendered him mute. Anna, for her part, was a statue of composure. She had disassembled the handgun and laid the pieces on the seat beside her, a methodical, almost meditative act. Her mind, however, was a maelstrom. Silas. Thorne sent Silas. The implications were catastrophic. Her past wasn't just catching up to her. It had been actively hunting her, and the hunt was now over. The game had moved from evasion to open conflict. They swept through the gates of the estate, which now bristled with a visible and heightened level of security. Guards with tactical vests and rifles stood at attention. Mrs. Davenport met them at the entrance, her face pale, the iron mask of her professionalism finally cracked with what looked like genuine fear. Leo thanked God, she breathed before her eyes shifted to Anna. "Mr. Vance wants to see you. In his office. Immediately. Alone." It was not a request. Leo opened his mouth to object, to demand answers, but Anna silenced him with a look. "It's all right, Leo." She gave the inert pieces of the gun a final glance, and then walked away, following Mrs. Davenport into the belly of the beast. When she entered Alistair Vance's office for the second time, the atmosphere was completely transformed. The imposing, dismissive CEO was gone. In his place was a man radiating a lethal, controlled fury. He stood by the great window, not with his back to her, but turned to face the door, his hands clasped behind him. The setting sun bathed the city in hues of orange and blood, and the light cast his face in harsh, grim shadows. He did not waste time with pleasantries. Project Icarus. He said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. The final incident report stated there were no survivors from the core strategy team. It was explicit. It said you were dead. Anna walked to the center of the room, stopping at the same spot as before. The power dynamic, however, had been inverted. "Reports can be inaccurate, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice steady. "As you saw today with the operational status of Silas." Alistair's jaw clenched. "Thorn," he bit out the name, tasting like poison. "He used my son as bait to get to you. This was an assassination attempt. He's been cleaning up his loose ends." "He has one left," Anna corrected. "Me." "Why?" Alistair demanded, his voice raw with a pain he could not conceal. "Icarus was a failure, a tragic accident. Why is he still hunting the survivors after all this time?" A cold, bitter laugh escaped Anna's lips. It was a sound utterly devoid of humor. Because it wasn't an accident. And it wasn't a failure. Project Icarus worked. It worked perfectly. Alistair stared at her confusion, warring with the rage in his eyes. Icarus was designed to be the ultimate corporate intelligence platform. Anna continued, her voice taking on the clipped, precise tone of a debriefing. An AI that could predict market shifts, identify rival strategies, and neutralize corporate threats. It was brilliant. It was also dangerously unstable. My mentor, David Chen, argued for more testing for ethical safeguards. Thorn saw it as a weapon, a tool to consolidate his own power. The mention of David's name made Alistair flinch. Thorn bypassed the safeguards, Anna said, her voice dropping, filled with the ice of memory. He used Icarus for a live, unsanctioned operation against a rival company. He pushed it too hard. The AI began to fracture to exceed its parameters in unpredictable ways. When David discovered the breach, he was going to expose Thorn, so Thorn framed him. He fabricated data logs that made it look like David was the one who had gone rogue. And then he triggered the accident, a targeted EMP blast, followed by a thermite fire to destroy the evidence and the witnesses. The truth, stark and ugly, filled the silent office. Alistair looked like a man who had been stabbed. He had mourned David Chen as a brilliant protege who had died in a tragic accident born of his own hubris. The thought that he had been murdered, framed by the man Alistair had come to see as his successor, was a betrayal of unimaginable depth. "I will ruin him," Alistair vowed, his voice a low growl. "I will tear him down to the foundations." "You can't," Anna stated simply. "Thorn has spent the last 3 years weaving himself into the very fabric of this company. He controls key departments, has the loyalty of half the board, and has backdoors into all of your critical systems. If you make a direct move against him, he will initiate a corporate scorched earth policy. He'll leak proprietary data, crash the stock, and burn Vance Industries to the ground before he lets you touch him. He knows you value the company above all else. It's the perfect defense." Alistair looked at her, his expression grim. She was right. He was a king, but his most powerful lieutenant had quietly built a fortress within the castle walls. "You can't fight him with the brute force of a CEO," Anna said, pressing her advantage. "You need the precision of a scalpel. He has a network, but every network has a central node, a single point of failure. Destroy that node, and the entire structure he's built collapses. I know his methodologies. I helped design the systems he perverted. I can find that node." A long, heavy silence descended. Alistair Vance, the man who controlled a global empire, looked at the young woman he had dismissed as a simple country girl. He saw now that she was his only weapon, a weapon he himself had helped to forge, and then cast aside. "I want Thorn destroyed," he said finally, his voice hard as iron. "Not just fired, not just disgraced. I want him erased. I will give you anything you ask for. Unlimited access. My security teams, my data archives, my financial resources. Anything. In return, you will deliver him to me." It wasn't an appeal. It was a transaction. Anna held his gaze. This was her chance. Justice for David, for the others who died in the fire. But trusting this man was like trusting a snake. "This isn't just about getting revenge on Thorn," she said, her voice steely. "This is about the truth of Project Icarus. All of it." "The truth would cause irreparable damage to this company," Alistair countered. "Thorn's crimes, the sabotage, the murders will be exposed. That is not negotiable," Anna stated. "Your role in the cover-up that followed, that will be determined by the level of your cooperation. Those are my terms." She had him cornered, and they both knew it. For a man like Alistair, the choice between certain ruin and a chance at controlled demolition was no choice at all. He gave a single sharp nod. Done. The alliance was forged, a tense, volatile pact born of mutual desperation and shared enemies. Alistair was a man of immediate action. Within the hour, the estate's cavernous and rarely used ballroom was being transformed. Technicians swarmed in, replacing antique furniture with servers, monitors, and encrypted communication arrays. It was becoming a war room. Alistair summoned Croft. "Miss Reyes is in command of this operation," he stated, leaving no room for questions. "Her authority is absolute. You and your team report to her now. You will give her anything she asks for without question." Croft looked at Anna, his professional gaze reassessing her completely. He saw not a tutor, but a field commander. He gave her a crisp, respectful nod. Understood. Just as they were establishing the command center, Leo strode in. His face was pale but determined. He had heard snippets pieced together enough to understand the terrifying truth. "Whatever you're planning, I'm in," he said, his voice firm. He looked from his father to Anna. "He used me. He put you in danger. This is my fight too." "This is not a game, Leo." Alistair began, his tone dismissive. "Let him stay," Anna interjected. Alistair and Leo both looked at her in surprise. "You're right, Leo. Thorn used you. He sees you as a spoiled, useless child, a pawn, and a good strategist always uses their opponent's miscalculations against them. You have a role to play in this." A new dynamic was born in that moment. The reluctant king, the prodigal son, and the avenging ghost. The chapter ended with the three of them standing before a massive central monitor. It displayed a complex, sprawling organizational chart of Vance Industries, a web of power and influence. At its very center was a picture of Marcus Thorne smiling his predator's smile. Anna sat down at the primary console, her fingers poised over the holographic keyboard. The soft blue light illuminated her face, her expression now one of grim, absolute focus. The hunted had become the hunter. "All right," she said, her voice echoing softly in the vast makeshift war room. "Let's go to work." The Vance Industries annual shareholders meeting was less a corporate briefing and more a coronation. It was a spectacle of power held in the city's grandest concert hall, a stage where Alistair Vance annually reaffirmed his dominion over the technological world. This year, however, the keynote address was to be delivered by his heir apparent Marcus Thorne. It was to be Thorne's ascension. For Anna, it was to be his public execution. In the week leading up to the event, the ballroom of the Vance estate had transformed into the nerve center of a silent war. The air hummed with the quiet power of server racks and the low murmur of Croft's elite security analysts, men and women who moved with a discipline that Anna recognized and respected. She was their undisputed commander. She moved between the holographic displays and data streams, her focus absolute, a general preparing her battlefield. Alistair was a constant brooding presence, a king watching from the ramparts, providing the near-limitless resources she requested. Leo, however, was her most crucial asset, her inside man. "He's arrogant," Anna explained, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room as she outlined the final phase of the plan. The faces of Alistair, Leo, and Croft were illuminated by the blue glow of a massive screen displaying Thorne's psychological profile. Thorne's greatest weakness is his belief that he is the smartest person in any room. He sees you, Leo, as a pathetic, spoiled child, an annoyance to be manipulated. We will use that. The plan was a masterclass in strategic deception, a digital Trojan horse. Leo's performance was the key. He stormed into Thorne's office at Vance Tower 2 days before the meeting, his face a mask of manufactured rage and fear. He played the part of the betrayed son to perfection, ranting about his father's paranoia, about the tutor who had turned out to be some kind of secret agent, about his fear of being caught in the crossfire. "My father is insane," Leo spat, pacing in front of Thorne's desk. "He's building a fortress at the estate. He's got this woman, this ghost whispering in his ear. I don't know what he's planning, but it's aimed at you, and I don't want to be here when the walls come down." Thorne leaned back in his chair, a picture of calm control, his eyes gleaming with predatory amusement. The boy was terrified. "Perfect. And what is it you want from me, Leo?" "Protection," Leo said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A way out. I can feed you information from inside the house. His plans, her movements. In return, when you take over, I want a place. A real one." Thorne's smile was thin and cold. He had won. The boy was just as weak and pathetic as he'd always thought. "I think we can come to an arrangement," he said smoothly. He opened a desk drawer and produced a small, sleek device that looked like a USB drive. "This is a secure communicator. It's a closed-loop military-grade encryption. Untraceable. Use it to contact me. And only me." Leo took the device, his hand trembling slightly for effect, and left. Thorne watched him go, a sense of supreme triumph washing over him. The final piece of his long game was falling into place. Back in the war room, Anna took the communicator from Leo. "Well done," she said, her voice holding a rare note of praise. Leo let out a breath. He didn't realize he'd been holding the adrenaline of the performance, leaving him shaky. Anna placed the device into a diagnostic cradle. "He's arrogant," she murmured, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. "He believes his encryption is unbreakable, but he built it on a framework I designed 3 years ago. And I always build a back door." For the next 48 hours, she worked relentlessly. It was a digital siege. Alistair and Leo watched mesmerized as she navigated the labyrinth of Thorne's private network. She didn't break down his firewalls. She flowed around them, using the subtle vulnerability in the communicator's handshake protocol to have his own system recognize her as a trusted user. She bypassed his intrusion detection systems by mimicking the digital heartbeat of his own encrypted traffic. At one point, an alert flashed on the screen. A silent automated security program, a digital guard dog, had detected a slight anomaly in the data flow. Thorne's defenses were reacting. "He's noticed," Croft said, his voice tense. "No," Anna corrected, never taking her eyes from the screen. "His system has. He's too busy preparing for his coronation to watch the guards. We just have to be quieter." With a few elegant lines of code, she didn't disable the guard dog. She simply taught it a new routine, making her presence part of the accepted pattern. She had turned the enemy's best defense into a part of her camouflage. Deep within the final encrypted server, she found it. The motherlode, Thorne's private ledger, recordings of his calls with Silas, and most damning of all, the original unaltered server logs from Project Icarus, which he had foolishly kept as a trophy, a secret reminder of his ultimate victory. She downloaded it all into a secure, isolated drive. The trap was set. The day of the shareholders' meeting was bright and clear. The grand hall was filled to capacity, a sea of expensive suits and expectant faces. Alistair and Leo sat in the front row, their expressions perfectly neutral. On stage, Marcus Thorne was radiant. He commanded the room, his voice resonant, his charisma undeniable. He spoke of innovation, of strength, of a bold new future for Vance Industries, a future that he implicitly would lead. In the war room, Anna sat before the main console, a headset on. "All assets are in place," Croft's voice reported in her ear. "We have physical control of the hall's server room. We're green to go on your command." Anna looked at a small monitor showing a close-up of Leo and Alistair. Alistair met the camera's hidden gaze and gave a barely perceptible nod. Thorne was reaching the climax of his speech. "And so I say to you, the future of this company is not just about profits." He boomed, his arms spread wide. "It is about vision. It is about the courage to shape tomorrow." "Showtime," Anna whispered into her microphone. On the massive 40-foot screen behind Thorne, the gleaming Vance Industries logo flickered. It was replaced by a stark, simple document, a bank transfer record from a Cayman Islands holding company to a numbered account linked to Silas. The amount was 7 figures. A confused murmur rippled through the auditorium. Thorne faltered for a second, glancing behind him. He tried to laugh it off. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, a slight technical glitch." His personal security chief was barking into his wristcom, trying to cut the feed. It was useless. Croft's team had physically locked them out. Anna's control was absolute. The document on the screen was replaced by an audio waveform. And then Thorne's own voice filled the hall, cold and clear from the recording of his call with Silas. "The boy is the pretext. The girl, however, is to be neutralized. I just want her gone. Am I clear?" The murmuring in the hall died, replaced by a collective horrified gasp. People were pulling out their phones, recording. Journalists were on their feet. Thorne's face had gone ashen. His charismatic smile had dissolved into a slack-jawed mask of horror. He stared wild-eyed into the audience and saw Alistair's cold, dead stare. He understood. But Anna wasn't finished. The final killing blow landed. The screen split. On the left, the original data logs from Project Icarus, showing David Chen's frantic warnings and ethical objections. On the right, the forged logs Thorne had submitted where he had twisted every warning into an act of reckless insubordination on David's part. Highlighting glowed, showing the exact moments of data manipulation, the digital fingerprints of his sabotage, his frame job, his murders. It was irrefutable. It was absolute. It was checkmate. Thorne stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight a circle of damnation. The illusion of his power, of his brilliance, was shattered. His polished facade cracked, and for a moment everyone in the hall saw the monster beneath. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Croft's men, no longer in security uniforms, but in the dark official attire of federal agents, moved onto the stage from the wings. The trap had not just been for public humiliation, but for legal capture. As they approached, Thorne finally broke. "Vance!" He screamed, his voice a raw, animalistic shriek of pure hatred, pointing a shaking finger at his former mentor. "You did this!" The agents took him by the arms. He didn't resist, his body suddenly limp, a puppet with its strings cut. The corporate titan was gone, leaving only a ruined man. In the quiet, dark war room, Anna watched Thorne being led away on the monitor. The hunt was over. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She pulled the small wooden meadowlark from her pocket and clutched it in her hand. "For you, David," she thought. "It's over." Her headset crackled. It was Alistair's voice, quiet, heavy, and devoid of triumph. "It's done," he said. "Come to the office. We need to talk." The war room was silent. On the dozen monitors surrounding them, the chaos of the shareholders' meeting had been replaced by the calm, authoritative faces of news anchors from around the globe, all speaking of the scandal that had just decapitated one of the world's most powerful corporations. The name Marcus Thorne was now synonymous with disgrace. Anna powered down the main console, the vibrant blue light of the holographic displays, winking out one by one, plunging the vast ballroom into a quiet, shadowed intimacy. The war was over. The silence that remained was heavy with unspoken truths and the promise of a difficult peace. She followed the summons to Alistair's office. He was standing before the great window, not looking at the city, but at his own reflection in the dark glass. He looked for the first time since she had met him like an old man. The iron control was gone, replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness. He turned as she entered. The fury was gone. The shock was gone. All that remained was the grim reality of the crater that had been blown in the center of his life's work. "He is in federal custody," Alistair said, his voice flat. "He will never see the outside of a prison cell again. You have my gratitude. You saved my son's life. You may have saved the company itself from his cancer." He walked to his desk and touched a screen. "The funds stipulated in your contract, plus a significant bonus, have been transferred to your account. It will provide for your grandmother's care for the rest of her life and much more." He paused. "But that is not enough. A debt like this cannot be paid, only acknowledged." He looked at her, his gaze direct, the first time he had truly seen her, not as a variable or a weapon, but as a person. "I am offering you a permanent position. Executive Vice President, head of a new division of strategic risk and ethical oversight. You will answer to no one but me. You will help me rebuild this company. Name your price. It's yours." It was the ultimate offer from a man like Alistair Vance. It was a seat at his right hand, a key to the kingdom. It was his only way of making amends, of trying to keep this extraordinary, dangerous, brilliant woman within his orbit. Anna gave a small, sad smile. "This was never about a price, Mr. Vance. It was about justice. My work here is done." The refusal, quiet and absolute, hung in the air between them. Alistair looked down at his desk, at the empire he had built on ruthless logic, and realized its limits. "What happens now?" He asked the question not of a CEO, but of a man adrift. "Now," Anna said, her voice firm, "you tell the truth, all of it." Alistair looked up, a flash of the old defensive fire in his eyes. "I've already given the authorities everything on Thorne." "I'm not talking about Thorne. I'm talking about Icarus," she countered. "Thorne was the saboteur, but the cover-up. That was you. The lies you told, the lives you allowed to be dishonored to protect the company's stock price. The world knows the villain's name now. They need to know the names of the heroes, too. Of David Chen. Of the 14 other scientists and engineers who died that day. A full disclosure would be catastrophic." He protested, the words a reflex. "The lawsuits, the government oversight. It would cripple us. It's the only way forward, Anna insisted. You can't build a new future on a foundation of old lies. Rebuild this company on truth. It's the only way to honor David's memory. It's the only way for you to earn back your son's respect. And your own. She was holding up a mirror, and Alistair Vance was finally forced to look at the man he had become. The ruthless pragmatist, the king who would sacrifice anything for his kingdom. He saw the cost of his choices reflected in the clear, unwavering eyes of the young woman his choices had almost destroyed. He collapsed into his chair, the great Alistair Vance defeated not by a corporate rival, but by a simple, undeniable truth. He nodded slowly. "All right," he whispered. "All right." The fallout was biblical. True to his word, Alistair Vance held a press conference the following week. He didn't just announce a corporate restructuring, he offered a corporate confession. He laid bare the truth of Project Icarus, praising the genius and integrity of David Chen and his team, and admitting his own role in the cover-up. The stock plummeted. Government investigations were launched. The board of directors was in an uproar. But a strange thing happened. Amidst the financial carnage, a new narrative began to form. One of redemption. Of a corporate titan risking everything to do the right thing, however late. The crisis had forged a new bond between father and son. Leo, who had witnessed his father's confession, saw not weakness, but a strength he had never imagined. He chose to stay to defer his own studies. He walked into the fire with his father, not as a reluctant heir, but as a partner determined to rebuild Vance Industries into something worthy of its name. A few days later, Anna was packing her single duffel bag. The gray room was just as it had been when she arrived, but she was not the same person. The restless ghost had been laid to rest. There was a soft knock on the door. It was Leo. He leaned against the doorframe, a new quiet confidence about him. "I came to say goodbye," he said. "I'm not very good at them," Anna confessed, folding a shirt. "Me neither." He smiled. "So what's next for the architect?" She paused, then looked at him, her smile genuine and relaxed. "I think Anna is going to figure that out. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll go back to Havenwood and grow tomatoes for a while. The point is, now I get to choose." "A choice well earned," he said. He hesitated for a moment. "Well, if you're ever passing through Sterling City, I know a guy who's always up for a game of Go. He could use the practice." "I'll keep that in mind," she said softly. He left her then, leaving the door open to a future that was for the first time unwritten. 6 months later, the autumn sun cast a warm golden light across the manicured lawns of a university campus, renowned for its pioneering work in artificial intelligence. A new building was being dedicated, the David Chen Center for Ethical AI Research. A young woman with dark hair stood at the edge of the crowd watching the ceremony. She wore simple jeans and a jacket blending in perfectly. No one recognized her as the whispered-about figure at the center of the Vance Industries scandal. She was just Anna. She had used a substantial portion of her payment from Alistair to establish the center's primary research fund. It was not penance. It was a tribute. A way to ensure that the brilliance of Icarus would be remembered not for its destructive potential, but for the ethical questions it forced the world to ask. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a message from Leo. It was a single image, a go board set up mid-game, a white stone placed in a clever strategic position. Below it, a simple caption. "Your move." Anna looked up from the phone at the gleaming new building bearing her mentor's name, and a real, unrestrained smile touched her lips. She was not a strategist in hiding. She was not a ghost seeking vengeance. She was free. She texted a single word back soon and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Then she turned and walked towards the building. Her step light her face toward the sun, stepping into the beginning of her new life. Her real climb was just beginning.